Well, hello, all you Bond bros and money pennies. I don't know why I was doing that weird British accent. It doesn't even go along with the Bond movies. It's more like Train Spotting. Well, welcome back to another hot, fresh popcorn, guys. Thanks for joining me in the second part of my 1 through 6 series, James Bond Never Dies, where I'm covering every actor that ever played James Bond, reviewing one of their films, and ranking them 1 through 6. Last video, I kind of did an intro about how James Bond was played by so many different actors and it sort of changed shape over the years, and then got into my Sean Connery portion. Well, this one we're getting into George Lazenby, who's notoriously famous for doing only one Bond film. That's right, on Her Majesty's Secret Service. So this one had all kinds of weird issues and problems from the get-go just because Connery wanted out. He already said that, nah, I don't want to be in the next one, even though they advertised this one was coming at the end credit scene of You Only Live Twice, like they did in every Bond movie. So they had already advertised this movie was coming out and they had nobody to do it. Sean Connery was just like, nah, peace out. After 5 films, I want to do something else, which I can kind of understand that at the time. But also, I've always been one of those guys that's like, you know what? If I'm synonymous with a character like James Bond or Spider-Man or some sort of superhero that, I don't know, I feel like I'd kind of owe it to the franchise to keep it going. That's just my thoughts. I'm not in their shoes. I've never played the same role in 5 movies over, so I don't know what I'm talking about. So they were scrambling to figure out who was going to be Bond. They had a movie coming up that needed to be released on a certain day with no Bond. They had the story and everything. Well, in comes George Lazenby. And if you see I named at the beginning of this one Lazy Lazenby, you'll see why later on. I'm kind of naming each episode after the Bond for some sort of weird reason I feel fits with that actor. The last one I called it Bond Connery. Anyways, I don't know why I'm explaining that. But there's a whole documentary about this guy on Hulu called Becoming Bond, and it's fascinating. It really is. I highly recommend checking it out. It shows the whole process of how he got hired, why he did it, why he's not Bond anymore, everything that came with the territory of being Bond. But the documentary is really cool. George Lazenby's on the documentary. They interview him in present time and everything like that, so you get to hear everything from his mouth. The guy was an Australian actor slash model, more of a model, but he was also a martial artist. They just found the guy and they saw him immediately and the way his voice was, and they're like, you are Bond. And I get it. As soon as I hear him talk, as soon as I see him on the screen, I like it. I buy it. I dug this guy as Bond. I thought he was great. In fact, I think if I would have been alive at that time, I would have been pretty disappointed to find out he wasn't coming back for the next film. Just like people were disappointed that Connery wasn't coming back. And this one starts out just like all the other Bond movies do. They're walking in front of that gunshot thing and you see the whole him shoot at the screen. And it's pretty much following the formula immediately from all the Bond movies you had already seen because one, they wanted it to feel familiar. They wanted it to feel connected because it didn't have the same guy playing Bond. And two, it just worked. That formula was proven to work, so why run away from it? But it has this really cool opening scene on the beach, and it's really cool the way you're getting introed to Bond this time because they're doing it in sort of a silhouette fashion of him driving a car. You see all these little things of him doing these close-up shots of his hands, and like I said, the silhouette of him, but you don't ever see his face. Finally, when you do see his face later on, you're like, all right, this is the new Bond, and he does this whole breaking the fourth wall thing.
This never happened to the other fella.
But right away, they're doing something that I thought worked really well for the movie. They knew they didn't have Sean Connery, so they're like, let's put this in a trajectory that makes it feel new and fresh while still being a Bond movie. And it achieved it very well. In tone, the way the guy portrays Bond, he's a little more serious than Sean Connery. Sean Connery was so debonair and so just like, oh, I'm hot, I'm attractive, I'm indestructible. This guy seems a little bit more like a real person, a little closer to the Daniel Craig approach, and I'm going to get to that. But the way the whole movie is filmed and the way they get you in touch with this character of Bond and other things that are going on in the movie, it just has a little extra personal touch to it than the other Bond films had previously. I don't really know what it is and I can't even put my finger on it. It just, you feel a little more intimate in this movie than you have in the other Bond films. And it's still big and grandiose and all kinds of cool stuff. One of the things that immediately separated this to make it its own film and not like the others, the intro song to this movie, usually they've had lyrics now up to this point that sort of follow the title of the film. This one didn't. It's just music again. It's very Bondish. It's really James Bond sounding music, but there's no lyrics. And I thought that was a cool move to kind of give this start fresh again, sort of start from the ground up again. But the whole movie just feels a little different. It feels a little more mature than the past Bond films you've seen, and it feels a little less Hollywoodish in my opinion. Not that it looks cheap or feels cheap, it just, I buy it a little bit more. I don't know if I'm describing that well enough, but I just buy it a little more. All the action scenes are top notch. The cinematography is all really good. I feel like that they were getting more talent behind the camera at this point. It's directed by a guy named Peter Hunt, but it's a lot of cool choreography, stuff that seems a little bit more realistic than the other films. You're seeing all the tropes so far that the Bond movies have had. You know, poker table scenes, there's hot girls in it. It shows Bond going back to headquarters, talking to M and talking to Moneypenny. It shows him going and checking into a hotel, being a pimp like he is in all the movies. But the thing that sets this one off from a different direction than any other Bond movie, especially at this point, is Bond falls in love in this movie. And I'm not just talking about hooking up with a girl and that being the girl he has for the film. No, I'm talking like he decides he wants to give it up, falls in love, ask her to marry him. Now, if you consider me just giving you a spoiler right there, sorry, this movie's 50 years old. And that's one of the cool things that stand out about this movie, because I feel like that they were just like, you know what, let's really go off with it. Because there is a whole other solid plot line that you kind of get wrapped up in the middle of the movie where he goes to the Swiss Alps, and that's where you get introduced to Telly Savalas. Yeah, that's right, the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes guy.
You know, when people want to get away and play, they try everything to save some money. Ads in the newspaper, travel agents.
But he plays a villain in this movie just like a lot of villains you see in James Bond movies. He's bald, it's got that sort of charcoal gray buttoned up collared suit thing. The thing that really stands out about this movie is the fact that Bond decides he wants to give it up. And I know what you're thinking probably, hey, he did that in the Casino Royale movies too. One, that movie was way later. And two, when they started the Casino Royale movie with the whole Daniel Craig thing, that was a reboot. That was pretty much starting over with James Bond. There's a couple things with like M being played by Judi Dench in the Pierce Brosnan ones, and then all of a sudden she just transferred over into this new universe of Bond. But Bond's one of those things you just kind of roll with the punches with it. It's been going on for so long that you just kind of have to enjoy it. But since they had done that in Casino Royale, it made me think, I was like, you know what? I think Casino Royale with Daniel Craig, they were pulling from On Her Majesty's Secret Service sort of a little bit. That feel, that tone, because if you look at the way George Lazenby acts as James Bond, it's very similar to the way Daniel Craig acts as far as the approach to the character. He's a little cockier, he's a little rougher around the collar while still being debonair, but it looks like he's sort of been through some stuff. Sean Connery just looked perfect all the time. But I do think that when they were rebooting the whole Bond franchise thing when Casino Royale was coming out, they were like, you know what? Let's do more of that Bond. Let's dive into that personal side of Bond. Because if you look at all the other Bonds, Sean Connery, Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan, Timothy Dalton, those guys were very much the sort of Bond. Whereas George Lazenby and Daniel Craig, they're a little bit more discreet, they're a little bit more lay low, they're cool, they're a little more sure of themselves so they don't have to puff their chest as much. I like that style of Bond. As far as him getting married and everything, I'm not gonna get into how they meet because that really isn't all that interesting. It's just really interesting the fact that he decides to get married. And the girl that plays his love interest in this, Diana Rigg, man, she is beautiful. All the girls are beautiful in this. In fact, the main plot line of this movie is when George Lazenby is up in the Swiss Alps, and that's where the majority of the movie takes place. Telly Savalas is running this like allergy research center where all these girls are up there, and it turns out he's like brainwashing these girls, developing this sort of like cult thing. It's really weird, and you're enjoying all that stuff in the movie, and that's actually the part of the movie that keeps you interested, because it does have all the James Bond stuff. It is a full-on James Bond movie. You know, machine guns, shootout scenes. There's these awesome snow ski chase scenes that they do that hadn't really been done yet in a whole lot of movies. There's a bobsled chase scene. There's a demolition derby on a snow track. They have to survive an avalanche. One dude gets thrown into a snowmaker. Yeah, I remember seeing that and being like, oh, damn. But in the midst of all this action and everything in the Bond movie, there's a part where him and Diana Rigg, her name's Tracy in this movie, he just asked her to marry him because he's just fallen in love with her. But she gets taken hostage and captive by Telly Savalas' character, Blofeld, great name. And then once that happens, it gets even more personal and more along that Daniel Craig side, because then Bond's like, you know what? Fuck it, I'm going after her. Anybody wants to stop me? I dare you. And I love it because you get to see the sort of vengeance side of Bond that I love. I love it when Bond does stuff that's on this personal level. He's like, screw the agency, screw the service.
I have my orders, you have yours.
It's time for me to get what I want because I deserve it and I love her and nobody's gonna touch her.
If you hurt her again, I'll fuck you up. If you hurt her again, I'll fuck you up. If you hurt her again, I'll fuck you up.
And that part's all great. The infiltration scene where he goes to the base and he tries to save her and all this stuff, it's awesome. Classic Bond stuff. And it's a lot of great cinematography too. They're doing a lot of big shots, stuff with helicopter scenes, you know, stuff that's done at the magic hour where the sun sets just right. They're on mountains in the Swiss Alps. You can tell they're there. And the avalanche that happens is a real avalanche they filmed. They really went all out for this movie that didn't have Connery. But I think that works for it and even makes it better. I like that this movie has George Lazenby, and I kind of like that it's the only one he's ever done. Not that I wouldn't have wanted to see more of him, but it sort of makes this movie like this little gem that exists. It feels different than all the other movies while feeling like a Bond film and fitting into the timeline and adding to his character. So here's a crazy spoiler, guys. I'm going to give y'all one big time on this one, and if you don't want to hear it, plug your ears. But there's a big showdown with Telly, Savalas, and James Bond, of course. And James Bond wins, as always. And they go off and get married, and it's great because M is at the wedding, Q's at the wedding. You're like, all right. You know, it makes sense for Bond. And at this point, this was only the 6th film, so it wasn't, you know, it's like he's been through a lot. Maybe it's time for him to sort of get married, and a lot of people were thinking maybe this is the last one because it's a different Bond, and he's getting married. So he gets married, and they start driving off into the sunset, and she gets killed. Shot right in the head! Oh my God! I remember being as a kid like, what the f***? You can't do that! The movie's over, you can't do that! Yeah, they shoot her and the credits literally almost start going up, except this one scene. This policeman pulls up beside James Bond once he realizes that she's dead and he's holding her. She's in her wedding dress, he's in his tux, and he's looking over and he was just like, she's all right, she just needed a little rest.
There's no hurry, you see. We have all the time in the world.
It's really sad and dark. Like, I've never seen anything like that at that time, especially, but in a Bond movie too. It was like no happy ending whatsoever. And when I mean the credits are going up, I mean the credits go up. And then you see Bond will return and Diamonds Are Forever. Well, at this point, we thought George Lazenby was going to keep being Bond. He just decided in real life, nah, I'm done. I did a Bond movie. I'm cool. I don't want to do any more. What? Yeah, he just decided to peace out. I mean, kudos to the guy for just loving life more than that. You know, a lot of people would just be like, I gotta hold on to this forever. I have to respect the guy for wanting to do other things in life. And he's like, no, that's not everything. He was already a successful guy in Australia as far as an actor model. But still, I'm still slightly baffled at the fact that he just pieced out of doing James Bond. They didn't fire him. They wanted him to do like all the next movies until he was done, you know, like 5 more films. But no, he's like, peace. Like I said, strange, but I gotta commend him for it. Somebody who knows what he wants in life. However, on that Hulu documentary, you can hear all about it, and he pretty much says that he regrets doing that. All in all, I'd definitely say this is an awesome James Bond movie. This is one of my favorite movies. I'd say it's in my top 10 of the James Bond movies, and I gotta put it in the top 10 because now there's so many of them. There is actually a lot of good ones. But there's just something about this movie feels a little higher brow than the previous films. And it feels higher brow than Diamonds Are Forever, which came after this. Yeah, they got Sean Connery to come back after this movie, basically because they just offered him so much money he couldn't refuse. But yeah, go check out On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It's a great film. It really holds up. What I really like about this one is they don't rely on the gimmicks of James Bond too much. Yeah, they use the formula, but they don't rely on the gimmicky stuff. They don't rely on that sort of look at the camera and do a Bond pose. It's actually a really well-made film that just happens to have Bond in it. Feels the least gimmicky of all the Bond movies that had come out to this point. So my ranking of George Lazenby in the Bond franchise? Number 3. Ho-ho! I know I just pissed some people off right there. Well guys, thanks so much for joining me for that lazy Lazenby. And keep your eyes peeled for part 3 of James Bond Never Dies. We're gonna be covering Roger Moore. Tune in to see which one of his movies I'm gonna do. With that being said, look for BrassReel Brothers on Facebook. Look for Bobby Williams on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, BrassReel Bobby at BrassReel. Ooh, help us get to the top of those Swiss Alps with James Bond by hitting that subscribe button. And as always, if life gives you lemons, make some hot, fresh popping corn.
Is anything the matter, Celery?
Just a slight stiffness coming on.